MPD now actively looking for the suspect in the case, the victim's live-in boyfriend. They say just hours before she was killed, they'd been called to the house for help.
She talked about domestic violence, which is very ironic because that's exactly what unfortunately led to her demise. She spoke about how she was able to break free from a previous situation that her and her children were a part of.
Charlotte, North Carolina. Early morning, July 2, 2019. 35-year-old Aaliyah Terry, a mother of two, a domestic violence advocate, co-author of a book due to release in just weeks, was found stabbed to death in her own home on Gold Pan Road. Her live-in boyfriend, 32-year-old Isaiah Andrew Henderson III, was later arrested and charged with her murder. Just hours before, police had been at that same house. At around 9:57 p.m. on July 1, officers responded to a domestic disturbance call. Aaliyah told them no crime had occurred and the boyfriend had already left the scene. No charges were filed. Then, around 1:55 a.m., police were called back to the same address. This time, Aaliyah was found critically injured. She was rushed to a hospital and pronounced dead. In less than 8 hours, what began as a call for help ended in tragedy. Aaliyah had been fighting to leave a violent relationship and writing about that struggle in her upcoming book. Now, that very book became her legacy. And before we go further, if you believe no woman should lose her life to someone she trusted, hit subscribe now, because stories like Aaliyah's keep happening. If you scroll past this without subscribing, don't pretend it won't happen again. Let this case be one that sticks in your mind long after today. Aaliyah Terry was 35 years old, a mother of two, a devoted daughter, a loyal friend. Friends described her as someone who could light up a room, full of warmth, strength, and an unwavering smile. She lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, and her life seemed steady and hopeful. She was co-authoring a book titled The Queen Experience, meant to help survivors of domestic violence share their stories and heal. Her advocacy wasn't just professional, it was personal. Aaliyah had been through her own journey. She spoke openly about surviving abuse. She had found the courage to leave that past behind, to walk away from a violent marriage and begin again. But within months of that bravery, she shared her story in her upcoming book. She hoped that by sharing her experiences, she could help other women see a path forward. She took that step. She breathed life into her new beginning. The community around her noticed it. Neighbors spoke of her optimism. People in her life believed she was turning the page, toward safety, toward peace. She was ready to launch that book in August 2019. Instead, just before she could see it published, she was dead. But behind the smiles, there was a history of pain. Aaliyah Terry's first marriage was a cycle of fear and control. Friends and family say the relationship included bruises, shouting matches, nights she spent wondering if she would make it through until morning. Still, in early 2019, she made the decision to walk away. She filed for divorce. She closed that chapter of her life, reclaiming her freedom, determined to define her own future. She believed that once free, she could heal. But freedom doesn't erase scars, and sometimes the past or someone new can carry the same threat forward. Aaliyah thought leaving her first husband would finally bring peace, but the man she let into her life next would turn out to be far deadlier. If you've been saying it could never happen to me, think again. Subscribe now so you don't miss the stories that show how quickly love can turn dangerous. And if you're not ready to subscribe, go ahead and comment now and tell us why, because ignoring these warnings can cost a life. When Aaliyah Terry met Isaiah Andrew Henderson III, he appeared to be the fresh start she deserved. Charismatic, reportedly protective, the kind of man neighbors saw walking hand in hand with her on the porch, giving them hope she had finally found peace. But inside the home, the relationship was far from that image. According to neighbors and police records, what began with moments of affection morphed into tense confrontations. Reports show that in the year before her death, 911 operators logged at least 3 domestic disturbance calls and 1 assault with a deadly weapon call from the Gold Pan Road address. None resulted in charges. Neighbors said they heard arguments. Some described jealousy. Sources indicate Henderson's temper could flare quickly. What began as quiet disagreements reportedly escalated into shouting matches and emotional threats. By the summer of 2019, the situation had turned dangerous. On July 1, Charlotte-Mecklenburg police responded to a call at the couple's home around 9:57 p.m., described as a domestic dispute. When officers arrived, Aaliyah told them no crime had occurred and Henderson had already left the scene. No charges, no arrests. The scene was cleared. But then, just a few hours later, around 1:55 a.m., police were called back to the same address. This time, Aaliyah was found critically injured. She was rushed to a hospital and pronounced dead. In less than 8 hours, what began as a call for help ended in tragedy. Aaliyah had been fighting to leave a violent relationship and writing about that struggle in her upcoming book. Now, that very book became her legacy. And before we go further, if you believe no woman should lose her life to someone she trusted, hit subscribe now, because stories like Aaliyah's keep happening. If you scroll past this without subscribing, don't pretend it won't happen again. Let this case be one that sticks in your mind long after today. When first responders stepped into Aaliyah's home in the early hours of July 2, 2019, they were met with chaos. Furniture displaced, signs of a violent struggle, and on the floor, Aaliyah lay bleeding from a stab wound, fighting for her life. Paramedics worked quickly, loading her into an ambulance and rushing toward the hospital. But in the dark, quiet hours of that morning, hope was slipping away. A short time later, doctors pronounced her dead. She was 35 years old, just weeks away from the release of her first book, a project she had poured herself into to help other survivors of domestic abuse. Back at the house on Gold Pan Road, officers secured the scene. Evidence markers were placed. The once quiet suburban street was flooded with the harsh glow of police floodlights. For Aaliyah's family, the nightmare began with a phone call in the middle of the night, a loved one telling them she hadn't made it. The woman who had fought so hard to leave a violent past behind was gone, and the home she hoped would be her safe place became the site of her final moments. Detectives with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department began piecing together the last hours of Aaliyah Terry's life. The timeline was already disturbing. Just before 10 p.m. on July 1, 2019, police had been at her home. A domestic disturbance call brought officers to Gold Pan Road, but when they arrived, Aaliyah said no crime had taken place, and her boyfriend, Isaiah Andrew Henderson III, had left before they came inside. No one was arrested. Now, barely 4 hours later, Aaliyah was dead. Detectives looked at the scene and quickly identified Henderson as the central figure. He was the last person to see her alive. Neighbors quietly confirmed what officers suspected. They had heard arguments in the past. Some whispered about jealousy and shouting late at night. And with the previous 911 call logged earlier that evening, police saw the tragedy unfolding almost in real time. But what shocked investigators most was that Isaiah Henderson didn't run. Not yet. 2 days after the murder, On July 4, 2019, Isaiah Andrew Henderson III walked into the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and surrendered. He was charged with first-degree murder in the death of 35-year-old Aaliyah Terry. Detectives said the killing stemmed from another heated argument that turned violent inside her home. For investigators, the pattern was clear. Aaliyah had survived one abusive man, only to lose her life to another. This case wasn't just a homicide. It was a stark reminder of how domestic violence can escalate without warning, even after calls to police, even after a survivor does everything right to escape the past. If you believe victims like Aaliyah deserve to be remembered, click subscribe right now. If you don't, explain in the comments why you'd rather scroll than help keep these stories alive. Because every ignored story makes it easier for the next one to happen. Aaliyah Terry's death left her family and neighbors shattered. A life dedicated to resilience and hope had ended in violence she had fought so hard to escape. In the days following the murder, vigils were held in her honor. Friends and supporters gathered with candles and handwritten signs. The glow of the flames lit up the Carolina night as voices rose in prayers and songs. Neighbors remembered Aaliyah as a devoted mother and a source of light. Her story became a quiet warning to others living in the shadows of abuse, that even a second chance at love can carry the same dangers if help comes too late. Her death wasn't just a tragedy for one family. It rippled through the community, forcing an uncomfortable conversation about domestic violence, ignored 911 calls, and the thin line between survival and another statistic. Isaiah Andrew Henderson III was formally charged in first-degree murder in the death of Aaliyah Terry. He faced the weight of a crime that shocked both her family and the Charlotte community. The case moved into the court system, where prosecutors began building their case around the timeline, the prior domestic disturbance call, and the evidence collected from the Gold Pan Road home. But for Aaliyah's loved ones, no sentence and no trial could undo the loss. Her family said that justice could never replace the life she lived or the future she was meant to see, including the release of her first book, which would now serve as a legacy instead of a new beginning. While court proceedings continue, one truth remains. No verdict can bring Aaliyah back. Her story now stands as both a memory and a warning. Aaliyah Terry's life was full of promise. She had fought to reclaim her freedom, walking away from a marriage filled with fear and control. She filed for divorce. She was starting over. And she had turned her pain into purpose, co-authoring a book to help other survivors of domestic violence find their voice. Her story could have been one of healing and hope. But leaving is only the first step, because the danger doesn't always end when the relationship does. Sometimes it follows you. Sometimes it smiles at you with a new face. And sometimes it waits quietly until the day it takes everything away. Aaliyah did everything she could to protect herself. She called 911. She told police nothing criminal had happened hours before her death, trying to move on, to trust that things would settle. And still, she didn't make it through the night. Her story is a painful reminder that domestic violence isn't just bruises or yelling behind closed doors. It's an escalating danger that can end in seconds. If you or someone you know is living in fear, please reach out. Call a hotline. Tell a trusted friend. Don't wait until tomorrow, because tomorrow could be too late. And if you think this only happens to other people, remember Aaliyah. She was a mother, a friend, a neighbor. She was doing everything right, and still, she became a statistic. Hit subscribe to honor Aaliyah's memory
and to help keep stories like hers alive. If you won't, at least comment RIP Aaliyah below, because forgetting her story, scrolling past like it never happened, is how tragedies like this keep repeating. Your voice matters. Your awareness could save someone else's life. Aaliyah Terry's story leaves us with difficult questions. Do you think police could have prevented this tragedy after the first 911 call? Was justice truly served in Aaliyah's case? Or is her family left with a hole no verdict can ever fill? We read every comment, and your voice matters. Share your thoughts below, because conversations like this are how awareness begins. And if you thought this story was chilling, wait until you hear about the woman who abandoned her family, only to be found years later, living under a new name. Make sure to subscribe before you go, so no story like Aaliyah's ever fades away unnoticed. Before we close, I want to speak to you directly. Telling stories like Aaliyah Terry's isn't easy. It takes dozens of hours to research every detail, verify the facts, and craft it in a way that honors the victim and keeps you informed. I make these videos because their stories matter, and because awareness saves lives. But the truth is, without your support, these stories fade into silence. So if you care about keeping these stories alive, if you believe no victim should ever be forgotten, please subscribe right now. It's free for you, but it means the world to me and helps this channel keep going so I can continue to bring you the stories that others might never tell. And if you're watching this and still thinking, I'm not going to subscribe, leave a comment and tell me why. I want to understand, because if we can't keep these stories alive together, the next Aaliyah might go unheard. Your voice and your subscription are what keeps stories like Aaliyah's alive.